My name is Elise Caro, 34 years old. The morning everything snapped. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon toast and fresh snow, the kind of morning that should have been the start of a perfect family memory. We'd been planning that weekend trip to Colorado for months. My husband, the kids, a small cabin tucked into the mountains, sledding and hot cocoa and no cell service. A reset, he called it, a memory maker. We were loading up from my parents' place because they lived closer to the freeway and insisted we stay the night to make an early start. The kids were jittery with excitement. My 4-year-old stepdaughter, his daughter from his previous marriage, was bouncing around the living room in her little snow boots, hugging her stuffed owl and telling everyone she was going to sled faster than the wind. Her suitcase was supposed to be in the guest bedroom, a small pink rolling case with cartoon cats on it. She'd help me pack it herself. Tiny sweaters, leggings, mittens with strings, the owl's backup outfit. We'd zipped it together before bed and parked it upright at the end of the guest bed like a promise. When I walked into the room that morning, the bed was neatly made. The suitcase was gone. At first I thought I'd misremembered. Maybe my husband had grabbed it early. I checked the closet. Nothing. Looked under the bed, even though there was no way it would fit under there. Nothing. My heart rate ticked up. I opened the guest bath, then the hallway linen closet, then the garage. Maybe my dad had moved it when he brought in the sleds. Nothing. The house hummed with normal noise. Cartoons murmuring in the background. My husband outside, laughing with our older kid about who could stack more firewood. Coffee pouring. Cups clinking. I walked into the kitchen, forcing my voice to stay light. "Hey, Mom, have you seen a little pink suitcase?" Rolling. Cats on it. It was in the guest room. She sat at the table, both hands wrapped around a mug, staring at her phone. She didn't even look up. "She's not going on the trip," she said. "There are moments where the world goes razor sharp and slow at the same time. That was one of them." I blinked. "What?" Mom took a calm sip of coffee, set the mug down with almost exaggerated care, and finally looked at me. Her eyes were flat. "I put it away," she said. "She's not coming. Maybe next year if she learns her place." The words didn't make sense at first. My brain tried to rearrange them into something else, some kind of joke, a bad attempt at discipline, anything. "She's 4, I said stupidly, as if she'd forgotten. "What are you talking about?" "It's safe," Mom said. "The suitcase." She waved vaguely toward the hall, as if she'd placed it in a vault instead of hiding a child's clothes out of spite. "But she's not part of this family, Elise. You need to stop pretending." Something inside me, something I'd been carefully patching for years, split straight down the middle. My stepdaughter, my husband's daughter, has been in my life since she was 18 months old. From the day we told my parents about her, they never fully accepted her. They never said it out loud. It was always little things. Family photos where she accidentally ended up on the edge and then got cropped out when Mom posted them. Holidays where gifts were set out in neat piles for my niece and nephew and our biological kid, but nothing with her name on it. Just, "We'll get her something later." We weren't sure what she liked. Birthday cards mailed to the house signed, "Love, Grandma and Grandpa," with a list of kids' names that didn't include hers. Jokes about, "When you have your own child, you'll understand," as if she was a placeholder instead of a person. I'd called it subtle. I'd told myself it was old-fashioned discomfort, something time and proximity would heal. That morning in the kitchen, with my mother staring at me like she'd just enforced a house rule, I couldn't pretend anymore. "You hid her suitcase," I said slowly, on purpose. Mom's lips tugged up into a little smirk. "You're overreacting. She'll be fine here. You and your husband can have some real family time. Maybe next year, if she's better behaved, she can come." Better behaved. The child who says, "Excuse me," before she interrupts and cries, if she thinks she's made the dog sad. I felt my hands shaking. "Tell me where it is." "Drop it," she snapped, the faux calm slipping. "You're not even her mother, Elise. You're playing house with someone else's kid, and it's embarrassing. Your husband should understand that she has her place." I didn't argue. I turned around and walked straight outside. My husband was bent over the trunk, organizing boots and snacks, humming some stupid 80s song under his breath. Our daughter, my daughter, was hopping from one foot to the other, chanting, "Mountains, mountains, mountains!" "Inside," I said. My voice sounded wrong, thin and sharp. He straightened, frowning. "What's wrong?" "Now," I repeated. He took one look at my face and didn't ask another question. He followed me in, mud on his boots, hands still full of grocery bags. In the living room, my parents were acting like hosts at some cozy B&B, my dad with the TV remote, my mom with her coffee. My siblings were scattered around the room, their spouses, a couple of cousins, kids running loops between the sofas, completely unaware of the landmine in the middle of the room. "Everyone in the living room," I said, louder now. "Now, please." There's a particular kind of silence that only happens when a big family obeys a command they don't understand. TV muted. Conversations clipped off mid-sentence. Feet shuffling. People gathering with half-eaten toast in their hands. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. "My mother hid my daughter's suitcase," I said. "She decided, on her own, that a 4-year-old wasn't going on this trip. She told me she's not part of this family and that maybe next year, if she learns her place, she can go." Mouths dropped open. Someone swore under their breath. One of my cousins whispered, "She didn't," and looked at my mom for denial. Mom didn't deny it. She just stiffened, chin lifting like she was on some moral high ground. My dad's face went hard. He stood, set the remote down, and stared at me like I'd brought shame upon the house. "You seriously expect us to pretend she's our granddaughter?" he said. "You're not even her mother." The words hit my husband harder than they hit me. He stepped forward. For a moment, I was scared of what he might say or do. I'd never seen his jaw that tight. His voice, when it came, was calm in a way that terrified me more than shouting ever could. "No," he said. "She's not her biological mother. She is my wife, and she is her mother now, and I am her father. If you can't respect that, you're out. Out of our lives, our business, and our future." A ripple went through the room. My parents went pale, because this wasn't just about holiday dinners. My husband owns a successful company, the same one my parents had been circling for years, hoping for roles, connections, money. They'd dropped hints at barbecues, offered advice at holidays, bragged to friends about helping him grow. In their minds, our success was something they'd eventually tap into, like a family well. With one sentence, my husband capped the well and threw away the crank. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw it. The moment they realized the door they'd been inching toward for years was slamming shut. "We're done," I said. "From now on, you don't get to pick and choose which of my children exist. You hid her luggage like you could hide her from our life. That suitcase wasn't an accident. It was a message. Here's mine. You don't exist to us anymore." I meant it. For once, I meant it all the way through. What I didn't say in that moment, but knew with a small, stunned part of myself, was that this meant more than cutting off emotional access. For the past year, I had been sending my parents $700 a week. My husband handed me the money without blinking. "Help them if you want," he'd say. It's your call." He knew they weren't kind to me. He didn't know how deep their cruelty ran, especially toward our daughter. That minute, standing in their living room with my child clinging to my leg, I decided that money stream was over. We left for the trip without another word. No hugs, no fake. "We'll talk when you've calmed down." My parents stood on the porch, arms crossed, faces tight and wounded, watching us load the kids into the car like we were the ones who had done something unforgivable. In the back seat, my daughter held her stuffed owl and hummed a song she made up about snowflakes and hot chocolate. She had no idea that a grown woman had tried to erase her. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror and felt the weight in my chest settle in, heavy and immovable. The cabin was going to be beautiful. The photos online promised peace. But I knew, deep down, that the real storm was just getting started. The cabin looked exactly like the pictures. Snow piled up to the windowsills, tall pines standing guard around a frozen lake that flashed silver when the sun hit it. Inside, there was a stone fireplace, a creaky wooden staircase, a kitchen stocked with mismatched mugs and cast iron pans. It was the kind of place Instagram calls cozy and travel blogs call charming. We did all the things you're supposed to do when you escape to the mountains. My husband showed the kids how to pack snow for a proper snowman, then how to roll down a hill without getting a face full of powder. We roasted marshmallows over the fire until they caught flame and laughed when they slid off the sticks. We played bad board games and watched old holiday movies where everything works out in 90 minutes. From the outside, it looked perfect. Inside, I couldn't shake the image of my mother's face over her coffee mug saying, "She's not part of this family," like she was telling me the weather. The first night, I barely slept. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind scrape along the cabin walls, and my husband's breathing next to me, steady and slow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pink suitcase at the end of the bed, and then not. The second night, I did sleep, but my dreams were loud. My parents were there, trying to take my daughter's stuffed owl away. I woke up with my heart pounding and her name in my mouth like I'd called it out loud. On the third night, after we tucked the kids into the loft with a promise of pancakes in the morning, I snapped. My husband was downstairs by the fire, scrolling something on his phone, the light reflecting in his eyes. He looked up when he heard my footsteps on the stairs. "You okay?" he asked. I sat down on the couch across from him, pulled my knees up, and wrapped my arms around them. Suddenly, I felt small. "I need to tell you something," I said. He locked his phone and set it aside. "Okay." All at once, everything poured out. Not just the suitcase, not just the sentence at the coffee table, all of it. I told him about the missing gifts, how my parents would show up to the house on birthdays with carefully wrapped packages for my niece and nephew and for our biological child, but nothing for her. "We didn't know what she liked," they'd say, as if a 4-year-old is a mysterious alien whose interest cannot be guessed. I told him about the Christmas card where they listed all the grandchildren's names, except hers. When I'd pointed it out to my mother, she'd blamed the printer. "We'll fix it next year," she'd said. Next year, it happened again. I told him how they always said, "You'll understand when you have your own child," right in front of her, puncturing her with every word. And I told him about the phrases they thought I didn't notice. His girl, his responsibility, his child, like I hadn't been there for every fever, every nightmare, every first day of anything since she could walk. He listened without interrupting. The fire crackled between us. "When did it start?" he asked quietly. "Day 1, I said. "They never said we don't accept her. They just didn't." He leaned back, eyes tired, jaw tight in that way he gets when he's trying not to feel too much. "And you still send them money," he said, not accusing, just asking. My stomach dropped. I'd been waiting for that question since the moment I started talking. "I know what you give them," he said gently when I didn't answer right away. "I've seen the transfers. I never asked because I trusted you had your reasons. But now I have to ask, why?" My throat felt dry. "For over a year," I admitted, "I've been sending them $700 every week." He didn't flinch. No sharp intake of breath. No outrage. Just a slow blink. "You told me to help if I wanted," I reminded him. "You said it was my call. You never questioned it, so I did. I told myself they needed it, that they sacrificed for me, that I owed them something for raising me." I swallowed, my voice starting to shake. "I thought maybe if I helped them financially, it would soften them. Make them see her, appreciate you, appreciate us. I thought if I kept giving, they'd eventually decide she counted." "And did they?" he asked. I pictured my mother's hand around the mug, her voice saying, "She's not part of this family." "No," I said. He sighed, not an angry sigh, a sad one. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I was afraid you'd tell me to stop," I said, hating how small my voice sounded, and I wasn't ready to admit that they were choosing money over a little girl, that they could take all that and still lock her suitcase away. He was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped and shifted, wood collapsing into itself. "I don't care about the money," he said finally. "If they needed help and they treated you with respect, treated our kids with love, I would give more without blinking. That's not the issue." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking me straight in the eye. "What I care about is that you are bleeding yourself for people who would happily watch our daughter sit on a porch while we drove away. They're not just hurting you, they're hurting her, and I won't let them do that." I felt something come loose inside my chest. Guilt, maybe, or the belief that I had to make my parents' happiness my full-time job. "So what do we do?" I whispered. He didn't hesitate. "When we get home, you cancel the transfer. You don't warn them. You don't explain. You don't negotiate. You cut it off. And then we see who they are when they aren't being fed." I nodded, because there wasn't anything else left to do. On the first Monday back, after the suitcases were unpacked and the kids were back in their routines, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a knot in my stomach. It took 3 clicks to find the recurring transfer. $700 every Friday. 52 weeks. I hovered over the cancel button for a full 30 seconds, listening to my heartbeat in my ears. Then I clicked. There was no dramatic animation, no confetti, no warning alarm, just a small confirmation. Transfer canceled. It felt like jumping out of a burning house and not knowing if the ground would catch you. I didn't text my parents. I didn't answer their old voicemails. I just let it be. It took exactly 3 days. On Thursday, my mom texted me a single question mark. On Friday, she followed it up. "Mom, is something wrong with the bank?" "Mom, the transfer didn't come through." When I didn't respond, the tone sharpened. "Mom, I can't believe you'd do this without talking to us. Mom, after everything we did for you. Mom, you're letting that man control you." She ended with the familiar refrain. Mom, don't forget who raised you. On Saturday, my dad chimed in. Dad, what the hell are you doing? Dad, you're acting like we're strangers. I stared at the messages, felt anger rise like heat in my chest. Then I put my phone down and walked away. They didn't ask if I was okay, didn't ask how the kids were, didn't mention the suitcase, didn't apologize. They only noticed that the pipeline had gone dry. On Monday, my husband's assistant called him mid-morning. I heard his end of the conversation from the hallway. Yes? No, he's not on the schedule. He said he was who? Later, he told me. My father had shown up at his office unannounced, trying to push his way past reception. He'd told the front desk he had an urgent matter about the business. He needed to speak with the owner immediately. Security escorted him out. He tried to use my company to get to you, my husband said. That's all this was. The next day, my mother tried her version. I was alone with the kids when she came. She knocked for 10 minutes straight, sharp, rapid, insistent. I stood in the hallway holding my breath until the knocking stopped. She didn't leave a voicemail. She slipped something through the mail slot instead. It was a letter. 3 pages. Her tiny, rushed cursive crawling over every inch of the paper like she was trying to strangle the margins. I read the first paragraph. She called me ungrateful, said I was ruining my future, accused my husband of turning me against my own blood. Not one line said I'm sorry. Not one line mentioned my daughter's name. She wrote, "You're throwing away a lifetime of love for a child who will never fully be yours." I stopped reading. I didn't need to see how she ended that sentence. I tore the pages in half, then into quarters, until the words were just black slashes on white confetti, and dropped them into the trash. But one line hung in my mind like smoke. You think you're punishing us, but you're punishing yourself. That same week, a member of my husband's board called. He sounded uncomfortable, polite but strained. He said he'd received an anonymous email from Concerned Family raising questions about whether my husband was up to the task of managing his business responsibly. The email implied mismanagement of funds and suggested that trusted elders, my parents, could step in to advise or oversee certain aspects. They had tried to undercut his reputation, to slide themselves into his professional life by casting doubt on his competence. When my husband told me, he didn't yell. He just looked at me and said very quietly, "I'm done." Then, after a beat, "If they want war, they can have it. But they're not part of our life, not anymore." That night, we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by our own documents, bank statements, old texts, the memory of a small pink suitcase that never made it to the car. "This isn't just about them rejecting her," he said. "It's about control, power, entitlement. They won't stop unless we make it impossible to keep coming back." For the first time since this all began, I realized something terrifying and oddly freeing. This wasn't a series of isolated incidents. This was a pattern. And patterns can be broken. 2 weeks of silence. That's what came after the board member incident. No calls, no texts, no drive-bys, not even one of my mother's chain-forward inspirational quotes or Emma's daily latte selfies. To anyone else, it might have looked like peace. To me, it felt like the inhale before a scream. My husband kept telling me to enjoy it, that maybe, they finally realized how far they'd pushed. But I knew better. My parents don't retreat. They regroup. Silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And right on cue, the quiet cracked at 1:14 a.m. on a Thursday. My phone lit up on the nightstand with a text from my sister. "Emma, are you seriously cutting off Mom and Dad? Emma, for good?" My eyes burned as I stared at the screen in the dark. Somewhere deep down, part of me hoped she was calling to offer insight, apology, something human. But I also knew she was their messenger, their echo. I typed back, "Me, yes." 2 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. Then the voicemail came through. Her voice was thick, teetering between tears and anger. "Elise, what's wrong with you? Mom is devastated. Dad is devastated. You're letting that man and a child who isn't even yours turn you against your own blood. This isn't you. You're throwing away your family." That man, a child who isn't even yours. My husband was asleep beside me, but when I played the voicemail on speaker the next morning, he shook his head slowly and walked out of the room before it even finished. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. He'd stood in the living room of my childhood home and declared himself that child's father. He had defended her with everything he had. And my family pretended not to hear. I texted Emma back as calmly as I could. "Me. When you're ready to hear the truth, I'll tell you. Until then, don't contact me again." She didn't reply. But the universe did. because Emma had barely gone silent before the floodgates opened. First, it was my aunt, sweet, well-meaning, chronically out of the loop, calling to ask if everything was okay with my nerves. Then a cousin I hadn't spoken to since college sent me a long Facebook message about honoring parents even when they're flawed. Then a family friend posted a vague status online about children forgetting who fed them when they were hungry, and tagged no one, yet messaged me privately asking if I'd consider reconciliation before things get worse. That's when I understood. My parents hadn't learned anything from being confronted. They hadn't reflected. They hadn't apologized. They'd gone on a full-blown PR campaign. They told every person in the family tree that I'd cut them off financially, that they were struggling, that my husband had manipulated me, that I was neglecting them emotionally, spiritually, even morally, because of a child that wasn't really mine. They didn't want sympathy. They wanted pressure. They knew if they couldn't reach me directly, they'd send an army of relatives to do it for them. They'd weaponize guilt the way some families weaponize tradition. For a moment, I actually felt tired, not angry, just tired. I didn't respond to any of them, not yet. My husband, however, was done. While I sat at the kitchen table rereading the same dramatic messages, he closed his laptop with a definitive click. "I'm calling our lawyer," he said, calm but cold. "Why?" "Because they're not just your parents anymore. They're a liability." Within days, everything that once felt fuzzy and informal became legally reinforced. He barred my parents permanently from anything connected to his business. Not just no roles, no access, no involvement, but legally prohibited from associating themselves with his company in any public or private capacity. They'd never held official titles, but they acted like they did. They'd mingle at fundraisers, drop hints about being in the circle, even offer unsolicited advice to his partners, as if whispering from the inner sanctum. That ended, permanently. He handed me the documents when they were finalized. Black ink, legal signatures, cold, thin paper that suddenly felt like armor. I sat at the kitchen counter staring at the stack. My hands shook a little. "You didn't have to do this," I whispered. "I did," he said, "because they tried to tear down what I built, and now I'm finished giving them access to anything that belongs to us." He looked at me then, really looked at me. Not at the woman my parents raised, or the daughter they claimed, or the one who always bent until she broke. He looked at me and asked gently, "Are you ready to lock the door on your side too?" It wasn't a threat. It wasn't pressure. It was a question only I could answer. And I knew the answer. So I started cutting the cords. I blocked their numbers, deleted their contact info, removed them from daycare emergency lists, deleted them from school files, messaged the babysitter that under no circumstances should she open the door for them, warned the neighbors, reset passwords, scrubbed shared photo albums they still had access to through old links. Each step hurt. Each click felt like peeling off a layer of skin. But each one also felt like unclenching a fist I'd kept tight since childhood. For a brief moment, the quiet returned. No calls, no texts, nothing. But the silence wasn't comfortable. It was the creak of a floorboard in a dark house. And sure enough, they crossed the line that shattered the last soft place in me. It was a Tuesday. I was folding laundry when my phone rang. The preschool. The director. Her voice was polite, calm, but too calm. The tone people use when they're trying not to scare you. "Hi, Elise. I just wanted to confirm something with you. Were your parents supposed to pick up your daughter today?" My blood went cold. "No," I said immediately. "Absolutely not." A pause, a small exhale. "Okay. They were here during lunch hour. They said they had permission, that there had been a mix-up, but their names aren't on her approved list, so we didn't release her. We followed protocol. She's safe." Safe. The word punched through me. "They left," she said, "but I wanted you to know." I thanked her, hung up, stood in the middle of the living room, unable to breathe. My daughter, my sweet, gentle, paint-smudged 4-year-old, had been finger-painting butterflies, while two people who had tried to erase her days earlier stood at her preschool door, lying to staff, trying to access her without my consent. If someone had been distracted that day, if a substitute had been on duty, if protocol hadn't been followed. I sat on the floor outside her room that night, watching her sleep, her tiny hand wrapped around her stuffed owl, her breath soft and even. She had no idea. She didn't need to. But I did. Something broke cleanly inside me. Not jagged this time. Final. "This stops now," I whispered. To the dark. To myself. To whatever ghosts of obligation still clung to my ribs. The war they wanted? It was here. But this time I wasn't defending myself. I was protecting my daughter. And nothing. Not guilt. Not blood. not nostalgia, would ever stand between us again. The morning after the preschool incident, I drove straight there, still nauseous from the thought of my parents standing at the door, lying about permission like it was nothing. The director ushered me into her office with the kind of gentle caution usually reserved for people who've just walked away from a car crash. She'd already printed out an incident report, stapled neatly, every detail documented. "We don't take chances with children," she said, ever. She showed me the security footage. My parents didn't look frantic or mistaken or confused. They looked entitled, smiling, polished, certain the world would bend to them like it always had. My mother even leaned into the counter and whispered something to the receptionist, probably a half-truth dipped in charm. My father did the talking. He gestured toward the hallway like he was ordering takeout. The staff refused, but watching that video, I felt something in my chest twist hard. They didn't just disregard boundaries. They believed the boundaries didn't apply to them. I handed the school everything: birth certificates, custody papers, photos, restraining preference forms. "Flag them," I said. "Flag them in every way you can." And they did. Their names and faces were entered into the restricted access system, and every teacher, aide, and custodian got briefed. My daughter never knew a thing. She finger-painted that morning, singing to herself, blissfully unaware of the storm circling outside her little world. But I knew, and I wasn't going to let them stand at another threshold again. When I got home, the adrenaline became something else: hypervigilance. I changed passwords, every password. Email, banking, security, streaming accounts, cloud storage, even the password to the family photo album. My husband called our security company. By nightfall, we had new cameras, updated sensors, and a panic button installed beside the bed. It felt paranoid. It also felt necessary. Because the people who raised me were not acting like parents anymore. They were acting like intruders. 2 days later, the intruder changed shape. My husband was on a call with his accountant when I heard his voice go rigid. "No, that wasn't my wife," he said. "What do you mean she asked for access?" "Hold on, can you repeat the exact wording?" He stepped out of the office, pale with anger he was trying to swallow. "They called pretending to be you," he said. "Your parents. They knew enough personal information to sound legitimate. They tried to get access to our joint financial records." I sat down because the room tilting felt imminent. He kept talking, calm, controlled, terrifying in how careful he was. The accountant played along long enough to verify it was a lie. Then he called me directly. If he hadn't, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. My parents weren't trying to guilt us anymore. They were trying to breach our life. So he hired a private investigator, quietly, without telling me at first. I cried when I realized why. He didn't want to scare me until he had something concrete. But fear doesn't need evidence. It crawls in the dark whether there's a monster or not. 5 days later, he came home with a manila folder. He didn't speak, just handed it to me. Inside were surveillance notes, timestamps, photos. My parents had opened a P.O. box under my maiden name. They were using it to send letters to people in our orbit. My husband's colleagues, my neighbors, old family friends, even 2 clients. Handwritten letters, signed, "Concerned Family." Each letter was worse than the last. They claimed my husband was emotionally abusive. They claimed I was neglecting my daughter. They claimed my husband was isolating me from blood relatives. They said our daughter was being kept away from her real family for control. And the worst line, the line that made my vision go black around the edges: "Someone should intervene before something tragic happens." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. My voice didn't tremble when I spoke, because something inside me had already settled into a frightening calm. "This isn't lashing out," I said. "This is calculated. And calculated things require evidence." So I gathered everything, every text, every letter, every voicemail, every screenshot, every attempt to break into our lives. I made copies, digital files, printed folders, 3 backups. The next morning, I filed for a restraining order. The judge didn't need convincing. He flipped through the evidence with tightening eyebrows and said, "You have more documentation than most attorneys bring in an entire trial." 10 minutes later, the order was granted. My parents were legally barred from contacting me, my husband, or our daughter in any way. No calls, no texts, no drive-bys, no letters, no stepping onto private property, no showing up at school. Violation equals arrest. I walked out of the courthouse with a paper that felt like both a shield and a gravestone. I wanted to believe it would be the end. But when people like my parents lose control, they don't stop. They pivot. The day before the hearing, my mother came to my office. She didn't knock. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. She just walked into the lobby with the confidence of someone who believed the world still belonged to her and handed the receptionist a white envelope. Inside was a handwritten will, not legally binding, not notarized, just dramatic enough to be cruel. They'd removed me entirely, everything left to my sister and her future children. At the bottom, in her familiar neat cursive, "If you're going to pretend we don't exist, then we won't either." I waited for pain, for guilt, for anger. Instead, I felt relief. Because cutting me off meant there was nothing left for them to weaponize. I gave the will to my lawyer the next morning. He slid it into the file without blinking and muttered, "This'll help." And just like that, the restraining order was granted. It should have been over, but it wasn't, because my parents don't know how to lose. And the next thing they did was so low, so vile, it made every boundary we'd set feel like child-proofing a war zone. I should have known the restraining order wouldn't be the end. For people like my parents, a boundary is never a wall, it's a challenge. 3 quiet weeks went by. No calls, no letters, no unexpected knocks. Part of me almost believed they had finally understood that the combination of legal consequences, social embarrassment, and financial cutoff had forced them into retreat. But quiet with them never meant peace, it meant planning. And the next attack didn't come through them. It came through my sister. I got a notification from our security system at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday. Motion detected, front porch. I opened the camera feed expecting a package or a delivery van. It wasn't a package. It was Emma, standing there with her arms wrapped around herself, holding a tablet in one hand, a manila envelope in the other. She didn't knock. She just stared at the door for 10 minutes, as if she could will it to open, as if she expected me to crack under the weight of her silence. She finally sighed, walked to the mailbox, slipped something inside, and left. When I opened the mailbox, my stomach dropped. The envelope had my daughter's name written on it, in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a letter to a 4-year-old. "You are always loved. When you're older, come find us. We'll tell you the truth about what really happened." I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. My daughter can't tie her shoes yet without help. She still says backpack pack. She sobs if her popsicle breaks. And they were planting seeds. Seeds of doubt. Seeds of manipulation timed to bloom years later. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. When I told my husband, he didn't curse, he didn't yell. He stared at the fireplace for a long time, hands clasped, jaw tight. "They're not done," he said quietly. "Not until they think they've won." He was right, because 2 days later, CPS knocked on our door. The caseworker was calm, professional, heartbreakingly kind. She explained an anonymous report had been filed. Allegations of emotional neglect, psychological isolation, withholding the child from biological family for control. My hands shook as I signed the acknowledgement form. My husband invited her in. Offering coffee, she politely declined. She walked through our home, checked the pantry, the bedrooms, the playroom. She knelt and spoke softly to our daughter, who proudly showed her glitter slime and a drawing of me and my owl. Within 30 minutes, the caseworker closed her folder. "There is no cause for concern here," she said gently. "Your home is safe. Your daughter is loved. I'm so sorry you're going through this." She left, but the fear stayed. Because even though the report was dismissed, the fact that my parents were willing to drag the state into our lives, risk traumatizing a child, to make a point, that told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just trying to hurt me, they were trying to dismantle my entire life. And that's when my husband went quiet in a way that scared me more than shouting ever could. The next morning, he got on the phone, first with our attorney, then with his accountant, then with a tax professional. He ordered a full audit of every financial transaction involving my parents across the last 4 years. Gifts, loans, transfers, joint filings they pressured me into. Anytime their names touched our accounts, he wanted records, receipts, paper trails. Then he called his estate attorney. That evening, he handed me a sealed envelope. "My updated will," he said. "I removed every clause that could ever benefit your parents, directly or indirectly." He'd added a note on top, handwritten. "No one who comes for our child gets anything from this family, ever." I didn't know how to describe the feeling that washed over me. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't vengeance. It was release. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying everything alone. I thought maybe, this was the last flare before burnout. But then a close family friend called. A woman who had stayed neutral through everything. Someone who never took sides. Her voice trembled. "Elise, your parents reached out. They begged me to talk to you. They said they just wanted to heal things. But before we hung up, they said, she swallowed. They said, if she doesn't come back to us, we'll make sure her daughter grows up knowing what kind of woman she really is. Threats disguised as prophecy. Manipulation aimed at a child not yet old enough to spell her own last name. My vision blurred. My heartbeat slowed. This wasn't anger anymore. This was clarity. A purity of clarity so cold it felt like stepping into snow with bare feet. They were never going to stop. Not next month. Not in 5 years. Not when she turned 10. Not when she turned 18. They would keep pushing through every open window, every crack, every crackling silence, because they believed they were entitled to her. Unless I ended it completely. I filed a police report. Not one of those symbolic, just documenting things reports. A full, thick file documenting the preschool incident, the financial impersonation, the letters, the CPS call, the threats, the harassment, the evidence of stalking behaviors. My lawyer took everything. He didn't blink once. From now on, I told him, I want every legal barrier possible between my parents and my child, and me. We updated restraining orders, filed additional protections, locked down every possible loophole, changed every code, every account, every procedural access point. My husband changed our home title into a trust they could never touch. We cut off every lingering thread, digital, legal, familial. And then came the hardest part. Acceptance. It's been 4 months since the last incident. 4 months since the letters. 4 months since CPS. 4 months since Emma tried to slip poison into my daughter's future mailbox. 4 months since the last hateful message. Silence now. Real silence surrounds us. Some mornings I wake up and feel grief, not for them, but for the version of them I spent years believing in. Some nights I feel anger, not fresh, but old, the kind you discover in layers, when you finally scrape the manipulation away. And sometimes, unexpectedly, I feel nothing but relief, because I didn't lose parents. I lost the idea of them. The version of them I defended at every holiday. The version I excused when they hurt me. The version I hoped would one day be grandparents to my daughter. But people don't change when they think your pain is their birthright. They don't heal when control is their only language. And so, I stopped begging. I stopped explaining. I stopped trying to convince people who never intended to understand me. My daughter turned 5 last week. We asked her what she wanted for her birthday. She said, purple balloons, glitter slime, pancakes, and no grown-up noise. Grown-up noise, that's what she calls drama now. So we drove to a little animal sanctuary. We pet goats, we chased ducks, we ate pancakes for dinner, and drove home with sticky hands and a half-eaten cake in the trunk. No interruptions, no fear, no need to look over our shoulders. Just us. She fell asleep holding my hand. Her hair smelled like sunscreen and sugar, and the soft rise and fall of her chest felt like the safest beat of my life. And as I looked at her, small, joyful, open-hearted, I realized something that tightened my throat. My parents could have had this. They could have had a seat on that patio with hot cocoa, watching her in those 2 big boots giggling at birds. They could have been loved. They could have been part of something real. But they didn't want family. They wanted control. They wanted obedience, access, power. And when I finally refused to give it, they set everything on fire and dared me to cry over the ashes. But I didn't. I built something new instead. Something quiet, something strong, something real. And now when I think of them, I don't feel hate. I feel clarity. The clarity that comes only when you finally accept that some people aren't meant to be in your life simply because they share your blood. Family isn't who raised you. Family is who loves you. Family is who protects you, not who endangers what you love most. My parents don't know where we live now. They don't know how we spend our days. They don't get updates or photos or future access to twist the story. They lost that right the day they tried to erase a child to make a point. And here's the truth they can never touch. And she's happy. She's safe. She's loved. And so am I.